Welcome to Politics Now. Today we're talking about energy with Katie Robbins. She's the campaign manager of Nevadans for a Clean Energy Future. You guys are the initiative that is proposing to make Nevada get 50% of its energy from clean, renewable sources by 2030.
Correct.
So, first of all, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me why 50% by 2030? I know there's other, currently it's 25% by 2025. California has a bill in its legislature, 100% by 2045. Right. So why 50% by 2030?
So Nevada has had an RPS since 1997. It started out as really a leader, one of the first few states in the nation to even have a renewable portfolio standard. And over time, we have fallen behind, which doesn't make a lot of sense considering the abundant resources like sun, wind, geothermal that we have here in the state. Like you said, California is proposing 100%, Hawaii's at 100%, New Jersey just passed an RPS for 50%. So Nevada is importing more than $700 million worth of fossil fuels, and like you said, really only using about 20% renewables as of right now. So we think it's time to really harness what we have here in the state rather than importing all of that fossil
the
fuels.
Energy Information Administration did say we were at 21.6% in 2016. So tell me, I think probably the number one thing people, they're confused by energy policy, and they're confused about a lot of things, but the one thing that they all can relate to is the cost.
Right.
We're in the middle of summer. We're getting those triple digit bills. Some people, unfortunate people, even 4-digit bills. What will this cost Nevada?
Yeah, so our clean sources are very competitive with things like fossil fuels, and the prices are continuing to go down, especially solar. So we expect that it's better to have a stable market with clean sources like sun, wind, and geothermal, rather than a market that can fluctuate, based on whatever is happening around the world.
Yeah. A devil's advocate question: if the price actually falls at or below the fossil fuels, would we even need an RPS? Wouldn't people naturally want to gravitate toward the cheaper cost of fuel? Well,
it's competitive, right now, and like I said before, we're only getting around 20% right now of our energy from clean sources. So I think it's important to make sure that there is an accountability measure to really hold folks accountable that the way our language is written, it's only a floor of 50% by 2030, not that it can't exceed it. So okay. I think it's an important standard to set. Yeah, because we know in the past, for example, NV Energy has actually applied to exceed the RPS, and they were told no by the PUC. The PUC said, no, you have to provide power at the lowest cost, inclusive with the RPS, but you can't go beyond it if that's going to cost more. So they've actually been rebuffed when they wanted to go beyond what our RPS was. Yeah, well, I think like you've seen, recently, NV Energy proposing a plan to increase the amount of renewables that they want to use to power the grid, and we applaud those efforts, but we know that the only thing we can really do to ensure more clean energy at this point is to pass the RPS ballot measure in November. Yeah. I want to ask you about the energy choice and how it would interplay with this, but let me ask a question beforehand. Sure. Energy choice obviously would outlaw monopolies, and it would say that consumers could buy energy from a variety of providers, the assumption being that the competition would lower the price, although that hasn't always been borne out in other places. So let me ask you this. Would it be easier, in your opinion, to achieve this 50% RPS by 2030 with a single monopoly provider or without, or does it matter? It doesn't matter. The way our language is written, no matter what the energy market looks like in November, this is the thing that we need to do to ensure that we have more clean energy. So, no matter what happens with question 3, we're the accountability measure to make sure whether it's NV Energy or an open market, everybody is responsible and held to the same standard. Yeah. So let's just assume for the purposes of this question, that energy choice passes, and you can buy from a variety of providers. So would each one of those providers have to meet the 50% RPS? Yes, everybody who provides energy in the state will have to hit the 50% RPS by 2050. And so that would mean wherever the company is located, it could be a wind power company from Wyoming, it could be a power company from Texas, they would have to meet that 50%. Correct. Now, would it be the whole company that would have to meet it, or could a coal-fired company form a subsidiary that happens to run on, say, hydroelectric, and then sell from that subsidiary
where that's 100% renewable, they could sell that. Would that be acceptable under the initiative?
So the way the initiative is written, the legislature will have a lot of say in implementation and exactly how all of these pieces will fit together. So I think that would be a question for the legislature to answer when they implement this.
Yeah, because these initiatives really are a lot of it is broad brush, and the details are left to be worked out by the legislature, by the PUC, and groups like that.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we know that, well, actually, I should ask, because it doesn't matter, does your campaign have any position on energy choice? Or
We don't. We're neutral on question 3, and all we want to do is make sure that there is an accountability measure in us to ensure that we are increasing the amount of renewable energy used in this state.
Yeah. Now, what happens if whether it's a single provider or a multiplicity of providers, what happens if they don't meet this? What penalties are there? What goes on? Can they no longer sell energy here?
So penalties are another thing that the legislature are responsible for deciding and putting into practice during the implementation process.
Yeah. You're probably thinking of it as a matter of, who wouldn't want to meet these standards? If it's as cheap to do it as fossil fuels, why wouldn't you do it, right?
Well, exactly. And we know that here in Nevada, we are the prime example of a place that should be relying on more renewable energy. Place, like I mentioned, New Jersey has increased their RPS to 50%. We get a lot more sun here than New Jersey, so why aren't we harnessing all of those
Although New
resources?
Jersey's probably a lot of biomass, right, in New Jersey with the dumps and everything. I'm kidding. I'm kidding about. I love New Jersey. My sister was born there. It's a great state. So the campaign to do this has been funded by Next Gen Climate Action almost exclusively. In fact, I think exclusively, $1.9 million. That's Tom Steyer's group. Should people be concerned about that? I mean, from a political perspective, here you have, a little Nevada is here. You've got a billionaire who doesn't live in Nevada. He's coming, he's spending a lot of this money to kind of change our energy policy. What should voters think about that?
Sure. So like I said before, the RPS is not a new thing. It's been in place in Nevada since 1997 with Randolph Townsend and a number of a bipartisan measure that was put in place years ago. So this is not, the RPS is not a new idea for the state of Nevada. We are happy to have the support of NextGen, but this is a measure run by Nevadans specifically in Nevada. So we have a great coalition of partners that have been working on this issue for years, who did a lot of work on this issue in the legislature, not just last session, but many sessions before that. So we are a Nevada-based effort, and all of the partners here are Nevada-based as well.
And there's really no counter. I mean, with energy choice, there's definitely two sides, and they're airing ads one against the other, and they're going to debates and they're sniping at each other. I haven't heard really anybody oppose the 50% by 2030. Do you have an opposition?
We don't have an active opposition at the moment, but we have a lot of education work to do. So like you said, there's a lot of noise and a lot going on with question 3. And energy policy can be, a wonky thing to understand for a majority of people. So we need to make sure that folks understand what the RPS measure does, what it doesn't do, and why they should support us regardless of how they feel about question 3.
Yeah, because the worry, isn't there a worry that basically says, voters, when they get to the end of their long ballot and they see all these energy things and they've heard a lot of disconcerting things about the energy choice, that they might just say, let's just be safe and vote no. Is that a worry for you?
I think it's always a worry, but we know that voters vote no on a lot of initiatives if they don't understand exactly what it is. So it's our job over the next few months to make sure voters really understand what our measure does, why it is going to benefit them, why it's good, not just for pocketbooks like we talked about, but for health care costs and leaving, a better legacy for future generations of Nevadans. So we have a lot of work to make sure people know that that's what we're doing.
And that's interesting you bring that up. It's sort of, one step behind the philosophy of why you're doing this. Like you said, we've already had an RPS in place, but the reason behind those RPSs is that to switch from fossil fuels. I mean, the goal of all these campaigns is to say we need to switch our energy generation from coal, from natural gas, from other things that are polluting the atmosphere to things that are not polluting the atmosphere, and that's ultimately the goal.
Exactly. We want to leave a healthier state for future generations. If it is less expensive to use clean sources and will create, tens of thousands of jobs and bring billions of dollars to the economy here in the state, why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah. And I have heard, and I don't know if this is true, you may not know this, I have heard that Nevada could actually supply a goodly portion of the energy for the entire United States if a solar array of sufficient size was built here because of the abundant sunshine. If we had enough solar arrays, a big enough array, it would have to be pretty big, but it would actually supply most of the energy for the United States. Is that anywhere near true?
I have not heard that, but it wouldn't surprise me. Nevada is the second state in the nation with the most abundant of these natural resources. So with obviously sun being one of the top one.
Yeah. Now, if this does not pass for whatever reason, Nevada would still have the 25% by 2025
Correct.
that would have to reach. Would you try again? Would you try in the legislature? Because I know this has been debated in the legislature. In this last session, it didn't pass. As we've seen in our neighbor California, you try to get something done in the legislature, it doesn't pass. You go to the initiative to put it directly before the people. What would be the strategy if this doesn't pass?
Well, we're confident that we will be successful in November, and then, again in 2020 when we would have to pass again for the second time. I can't speak to what folks will be doing in the legislature, but we will be supportive of their efforts, but we are committed to ensuring that this passes both times. Yeah,
I mean, and it's hard to argue against, right? Because as you said, it's better for the environment. If cost is not a factor, if all things being equal in terms of cost, there really isn't a lot of reason why you wouldn't want to do this, right? Why you wouldn't want to switch to solar, geothermal, biomass, wind, and hydroelectric as sources.
Exactly, and we know that a vast majority of Nevadans agree with you. We've seen that through public polling that has been released, and we see that in the over 230,000 signatures we turned in a couple of weeks ago to officially qualify for the ballot. We know that this is something Nevadans want and are excited about.
Did you have any trouble gathering those signatures, or was it pretty easy?
We didn't have any trouble. We were out in communities throughout the state. We turned in petitions to every single county in the state, and people were excited that we were out there.
Here's kind of a shibboleth question when it comes to renewable energy. Would nuclear power count towards green energy under this 50% standard? Could you get some from nuclear?
It does not.
It does not. Now, why doesn't nuclear power count? Because it's zero emissions. If done properly.
Sure. We have a pretty broad range of clean sources, like we talked about, geothermal, solar, wind, and others that are specified in our language, but nuclear is not one of those.
Nuclear is not one of them. And that seems to be kind of an issue with clean energy advocates, that nuclear is something that they kind of shun because of the dangers, also the waste. It's not 100% emission-free. I mean, you do have waste, and that waste has to go somewhere. And Nevada has been, targeted as one of the places to dump the waste, and so the waste has always been an issue. But in terms of the actual generation of power, it's still zero emission. But that doesn't seem to resonate with a lot of the people who say, well, solar is better because not only is there no waste, but it's also cheaper. To start a new nuclear plant would require almost billions in terms of insurance and all that.
Right. We know that solar is cheaper. We know that we have an abundance of it. We also have one of the best geothermal markets in the state. So we have a lot of options that we can use under this specific ballot language.
Without any of the demerits, if you will, of nuclear power. Yeah. Okay. All right, sounds good. And you are also doing this campaign, I say you, I mean NextGen is also doing this campaign in other states, right? Arizona is one of the states? They're
doing this in Arizona as well, correct. But it's a completely separate measure, so I can't speak to what they have going on.
Any other states?
No. They were doing it in Michigan, but they reached a deal with the utility to increase the amount of renewable energy that they are using, so it won't be on the ballot there.
Yeah. It seems like this would be the most effective way to do this, would just to be establish a standard across the United States, right? Rather than having to go state by state to get this done. Eventually, you could get to all 50 states and get it done, but it seems like it would be easier if it was done across the with a federal standard. But that's something that's not really been explored, has it?
I can't speak to that, but you know, as with a number of other issues, it starts in the states, and the excitement that builds when you do all of these things state by state, and more people keep joining on. And I think that we see a lot of that excitement across the country.
Yeah, and the net effect, I imagine, behind this is that we will lessen the problems that we're seeing with climate and with climate change if we get serious about doing this, whether it's on a state basis, a national basis. Once we get really serious about reducing emissions, and I imagine we'll go beyond 50% at some point in the future,
sure,
that would have an effect, a net effect on the climate.
Definitely, not only on the climate, but the health of Nevadans, you know, not only Nevadans, but Americans. We know that when we use cleaner sources and we have more clean energy, we are reducing diseases like asthma and heart disease. And, you know, pollution doesn't know any borders by state, so we need to do what we can here in Nevada to help the country.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. Well, Katie Robbins, thanks very much for taking the time to be here today, and good luck in the campaign, and we'll probably have you back before November.
Thank you so much.